every 2020 I've ever listened to. Matt Murphy was the prosecutor in half of these cases. You'll know a lot of these cases. You're like, oh my God, this guy was that prosecutor. So many of us know about this particular case. It's called the dating game guy or murder. He didn't murder somebody on the dating game. But here is a man named Rodney Alcala on the dating game, 1979. It's a little long. Watch the clip. Seems like a great guy. Let's watch.
Well, let's see. Bachelor number one is a successful photographer who got his start when his father found him in the dark room at the age of 13, fully developed. Between takes, he might find him skydiving or motorcycling. Please welcome Rodney Alcala. Rod, welcome.
Bachelor number one.
Yes.
What's your best time?
The best time is at nighttime.
Why do you say that?
Because that's the only time there is.
The only time? What's wrong with morning, afternoon?
Well, they're okay, but nighttime's when it really gets good. Then you're really ready.
A bachelor number one. I am serving you for dinner.
Oh.
What are you called and what do you look like?
I'm called the banana, and I look really good.
Can you be a little more descriptive?
Peel me.
Well, I like bananas, so I'll take one.
Number one. Bachelor number one. All right. Say hello to Rodney Alcala. Rodney, come on and say hello. Congratulations, Rod. You did it with a one answer.
Unbelievable. Matt Murphy, you take it from there.
Well, it's fascinating, right? So that's a woman named Cheryl Bradshaw. And quick sort of coincidence. Today, I think they're issuing the first trailers for a movie that Anna Kendrick did. It's her first, for her directorial debut, and she starred in it as well, called Woman of the Hour. And it's about Rodney Alcala. Now, what's fascinating about Alcala, number one, you see there the charm. In that clip that we just watched, Rodney Alcala is in the middle of a murder spree that probably took about 100 lives. And when we're talking about, we've got an election coming up, right? And my book is not political at all. But when you talk about Rodney Alcala received a life sentence in the state of California in the 1970s. He kidnapped and raped an 8-year-old girl named Tali Shapiro in 1968. He fled to New York. He got away from that. She miraculously lived after being in a coma for 32 days. They extradited him back to California. He received a life sentence, and he was paroled in 34 months. So he, after
11
his
years
parole,
before that dating game clip, he had been convicted of murdering a child.
No, of kidnapping an 8-year-old off the street and raping her.
Okay.
And
she's the one who lived.
Kidnapping,
okay.
Right. She
Unbelievable.
lived, but she was in a coma
A
for 32
fail
days.
by the dating game producers, just FYI, but keep going.
Right, yeah. And they were actually very cooperative. It's Chuck Barris Productions. They were cooperative with law enforcement, I should say. I don't know if any of them are even still alive. But so that guy gets paroled 34 months for that crime with that little girl. He had a parole violation when they caught him smoking marijuana with a 13-year-old on the cliffs in Huntington Beach, paroled again. And then he was permitted to drive across country. And the lead detective, Craig Robeson, who's now a Superior Court judge, one of the smartest guys I know, estimates that he killed about 100 people. So that clip that we just watched, he's in the middle of a murder spree, finally murdering a 12-year-old girl named Robin Samso in Huntington Beach. The case went up twice. He was convicted, sentenced to death in California. Rose Bird, who was the old presiding justice of the California Supreme Court, reversed that case, came down. He was retried, went up through the Ninth Circuit. They reversed it again, and then it wound up on my desk with just the Samso murder. And then we started, no sooner was the ink dry on the return on a remittitor, we started getting DNA hits from cold cases in Los Angeles County. And we prosecuted 5 here. There was one in Wyoming. He was cleared to a murder in Marin. He's a suspect in 2 more in San Diego, and at least 5 that we know of for sure in the New York and Vermont areas. So this guy was an absolute monster, but you can see how charming he is, which is what is so fascinating about serial killers in general. This guy was a true blue psychopath. And I talk about this in the book, but one of the fascinating things, Megyn, about serial killers that a lot of people don't understand is, and I certainly didn't when I rotated into homicide, I thought they were all like Buffalo Bill, like the guy from The Silence of the Lambs, where kind of a weird outcast driving a van and living in a creepy house. The truth is, they're a lot more like what we just saw. They're charming, they're handsome. Rodney Alcala had a genius level, documented Mensa IQ. This guy was, he had a house with people who loved him. He grew up with, he never suffered any sort of abuse. He was a varsity letterman on his high school cross country team. And he was an absolute monster. And a lot of serial killers will target sex workers. You know, I think because of the nature of the profession, it's, you know, it's anonymous, and they'll go into dark alleys, and they really put themselves in a position of vulnerability because the profession, which is tragic. But Rodney Alcala wasn't doing that. He was following women home from bars. So his victims included a pediatric cancer nurse, a computer programmer, a legal secretary. All of these women, they're the same people that we know and love in our own personal lives. And he never should have had the opportunity to do that. It's probably, in my mind, it has to be one of the single biggest failures of the California Board of Prison Terms. And we're tracking hard in that direction again in the state of California. And people really need to be aware of that.
Right. Releasing prisoners early is all the rage now. But it is disturbing
what
you're
could
saying,
go wrong?
because we really want to find, like, oh, he was abused, or, oh, you know, something tragic happened to him. He had some mental break, and therefore I don't need to worry about the people in my life because none of them has that profile. But you're saying you never found the thing, like the snapped moment. This is just a sociopath, I don't know, a psychopath, maybe, whatever, from birth.
It's the guy standing in front of you in line in Starbucks, and you'd never know. That's what real serial killers are. Another fascinating one is this, and he's accused, he's presumed innocent, just like everybody else we talked about today, I guess. But Rex Heuermann, the accused Gilgo Beach killer. This guy ran an architect firm in Midtown Manhattan, not far from where I am right now. And he had a family. They often have successful relationships. They have jobs, they're employed. And a lot of them, like Ted Bundy or Rodney Alcala, are handsome and charming and have big, giant, IQs. So it is really fascinating when you get down into the nitty gritty of those things. And another fascinating thing about serial killers, they all want to represent themselves. And Rodney Alcala represented himself in trial.
Against you.
Against me and my co-counsel, Gina Satriano from the Los Angeles DA's office, who I love to death. And we co-tried that, the LA and Orange County cases, and we'd have to go in and deal with him face to face. And I'll tell you what, it was absolutely fascinating, because you hear about that and it's like, who would get into a guy's car like that? And then you meet him and you see the charm and you see the intelligence and the humor, and you can really get a sense of how manipulative they can be. And I dealt with him face to face for 6 months probably during the course of that trial. And it was fascinating. And ultimately we brought justice to all those families that have been waiting for it.
Well, you write in the book
long.
about how he thought, right up into your closing argument, which gave it to him, both barrels, that you liked him.
So we had to figure out a way. Once he went, it's called pro per. Once he went pro per and he fired his lawyers, there are so many technical elements to a capital case trial that you basically, it's really, there's two parts to it. Number one, your obligation is you have to treat them fairly, and you have to ensure that their due process rights are scrupulously followed, because you want to do that, especially when you're talking about the death penalty. Like, the foremost job of a prosecutor is to be fair, even when you're dealing with a monster. But the second part of that is we had to move the trial along, and they can gum up the gears so much. So when you went pro per, Gina, was like, what do we do now? I don't want to talk to this guy. And we basically decided that I would be the good guy. And every time we had to tell him no, which was all the time, I just blame Gina. And, so he would ask for 10 crazy things a day, and he'd be like, hey, Rod, sorry, man, I don't know. I would want it too if I were you. I don't know what her problem is today. She said, no, buddy. That's it. And that's how we've moved the trial along. And, you've got jurors, you've got family members. You have to have some level of efficiency. And that's how we did it. And it was my job basically to talk to him and to help him put on his trial, and to kind of, help him attach exhibits, to attach evidence markers. And, I basically, you're almost strangely an assistant in helping them present their case to ensure that their constitutional rights are followed. But honestly, I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was, and let me share a quick story with you. This is a guy who murdered 100 people, and he did it in the most sadistic, horrific ways you can imagine. And we had just sentenced a guy to death row who's a big, scary skinhead. And I didn't know how it worked in California at San Quentin, and they don't give us any training on that. Strangely, we get training in everything, but we don't get training on how San Quentin actually operates. And they have different yards. So there's an additional classification when somebody's sentenced to death and they go to San Quentin. They have different groups of prisoners and they classify them from the most dangerous to the least dangerous. And they're divided up into what are called yards. And I asked Rodney one day, I'm like, hey, Rod, what's the deal with guys like Billy Joe that are going up there? That aren't you afraid of him? Are you afraid that guys like that are going to kill you? And he was almost offended. And he turned to me and he said, I'm on the weenie yard, the name they gave themselves for the lightweights that aren't a danger to staff or each other. Like Scott Peterson is on that. I got a few guys that I've sent up that are on the quote unquote weenie yard. And he looked at me and he said, Matt, you know me, I'm not violent. Fascinating, like little glimpse into the psyche of this guy. Like, I'm not violent. I'm not dangerous to anybody. This is a guy who is smashing people's faces in with rocks and raping them repeatedly. Like this, he's as violent a human being as you get. He's monstrous, but in his own mind, he's not a danger. He's not violent. So it was a fascinating experience. And then, I got to closing argument, and then he realized I wasn't his buddy. And I ripped him as hard as I think I've ever ripped a criminal defendant. Yeah.
We have a little of that. Let's watch.
Oh boy.
He's got no soul or feelings. When you're talking about a guy like that who is hunting through Southern California, looking for people to kill because he enjoys it. He gets off on the infliction of pain on other people. He put new carpeting in his car. Who does that?
What was that about, that last piece?
So when they got to his house and served the search warrant, he had it was almost like it was like a mobile crime scene. He had this new Datsun station wagon, and he had just kidnapped and murdered Robin Samso probably 2 weeks before. And when we got there, all of the carpeting in the car had been torn out and replaced, almost certainly because it was bloody. So there was brand new carpeting. There was also binoculars. The windows were heavily tinted before it was fashionable to do that. So it was basically, there were maps, there was everything that you would expect a human predator would have in his vehicle if he was in the business of going out and finding people to get into his car so he could rape and murder them.
Do you owe back taxes or have unfiled returns? Along with hiring tens of thousands of new agents and field officers, the IRS has been sending over 5 million pay-up letters to those who have unfiled tax returns or balances owed. Don't waive your rights and speak with them on your own. Instead, Tax Network USA, a trusted tax relief firm, has saved more than $1 billion in back taxes for their clients, and they might be able to help you secure the best deal possible. Whether you owe $10,000 or $10 million, they can help you. Whether it's business or personal taxes, even if you have the means to pay or if you're on a fixed income, they can help you. Finally resolve your tax burdens once and for all. Call them at 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Megyn. Don't let the IRS control your life. Empower yourself with Tax Network USA's support and take charge of your financial future. Visit tnusa.com/Megyn today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.